The logo of Monster Hunter Wilds Ascendance hides secrets, often in plain sight, in the biomes in its periphery, and in the area at its crown, radiating light and infinity upon the Eastlands. In its changes from both the base game's logo, shifting from a horizontal to a vertical axis, and from the version that exists in the game itself, as the singular land spine is split into competing polarities. But it turns out there's even more to see here than that, and that's what I want to discuss today. Good day everyone, this is Heike, your local gaming academic, and today we're going to be doing a deep dive into the Ascendance logo, discussing dragon iconography in the art history of China and Japan, and explaining why Wyveria might just be a Dragonball. Please like, subscribe, sit back, and relax. So I've discussed the logo before, but since it was buried in the middle of another video, I want to briefly recap some of the more relevant aspects here. While all versions of the logo share the core 6 shape that marks Wilds as the beginning of the 6th generation, they also hold specific meanings related to the story and the world of Wilds itself. The logo for Ascendance is a modified version of the base Wilds logo, and both are modified from an insignia that appears in 2 places within the game itself. One on the path down to Sild, and another at the entrance to the Dragon Torch Shrine where you fight Xochia. This version of the logo is the only one that exists in-universe. That is, it is diegetic. The base Wilds and Ascendance logos, by contrast, are extra-diegetic. They do not exist within the world itself. This is important, as while the diegetic logo conveys information to the characters as well as to us about Wilds' world, the extra diegetic logos convey information only to us players. They are part of the game's fourth wall. The diegetic version of the logo is very likely representative of the Dragon Torch and its connection to the core biomes through the Wormways, or at the very least how the people of Old Wyveria conceptualized this relationship. The land spine is here shown as a single dragon. Its tail curls around the Dragon Torch, runs up towards this emblem of infinity, and then loops back down to the bottom. The 2 extra diegetic logos take this basic model and modify it in ways that speak directly to the player and our experience of the narrative. In the base game's logo, for example, the 4 core biomes are represented by blank circles comprised of core dragons, likely showing both their unknown mystery and the apex monsters. The single dragon is also now 2. If the complete dragon is the full circuit of the land spine, then this change tells us that this flow has been severed or interrupted. With the context of the story, we can infer it represents Xochia as a parasite on the Dragon Torch. This is reinforced by the game, where after slaying Xochia, the ecology of the biomes begins to stabilize and flourish, leading to the increase in biodiversity with new monsters that is the game's high rank. Ascendance's logo hybridizes the base game logo with the diegetic one, and brings its own set of changes. The empty spheres have now been filled with their appropriate biome symbols. They are now known quantities. The space around the Dragon Torch, meanwhile, is no longer broken, but rather mirrors the spiral circuitry image of the diegetic logo, and the torch itself is noticeably a flame. Moreover, the crystal-like icon laced with an infinity symbol is now part of the logo, rather than being absent like with the base game. The dual dragon motif remains, however. The rising dragon is consuming the infinity crystal, perhaps a stand-in for the Eyrie, while the other coils about Wyveria. The biomes are mostly blue, like the rising dragon. By contrast, the lower dragon and Wyveria are red, marking them as separate from the other biomes. If the blue signifies ascent to the bluer skies, the red may be simple contrast. Red and blue are a classic pairing in video games after all, but it is also reminiscent of the colour of dragon element, and the red glow that we see on Xochia during our fight, and on the guardians scattered by Kushala Daora in the trailer. The Dragon Torch is burning bright, perhaps showing an overdrive of power, but it is symbolically cut off from the rest of the map. This overdrive is perhaps unable to properly flow out across the Eastlands. These are the key points from my previous discussion, but from here I am going to deep dive into the logo and its core design motifs. The iconography in the logo depicting the land spine and /or Xoxia is a dragon. This is perhaps obvious and not immediately relevant. This is a franchise full of dragons after all, and the expansion has already telegraphed its deep narrative connection to them. But it's relevant because these dragons are not hexapod reptiles with bat-like wings. They are distinctly serpentine. They, or at least one of them, soars upwards without wings. These twin dragons are not, in short, Western dragons like Fatalis, they are snake wyverns. Okay, I meant to say they're Eastern dragons, which are historically linked to the Naga of South and Southeast Asia, but still, sorry Najarala. I make this observation not simply because these dragons are serpentine, but also because of the very specific design elements that they have. First, the dragons in the logos have 3 toes on each foot, which is in line with Japanese depictions of Eastern dragons. For reference, ones in China have differing numbers of toes, but the most commonly depicted are those symbolizing the Emperor, which have 5. Remember these feet though, they tie to something later. The more important visual tell here for now is actually this lump on the rising dragon's brow. The artistic depiction of Asian dragons is something that solidified gradually over time, incorporating a variety of features as artists sought to depict something with no real-world model to trace. Over time, the convention arose to depict them as chimerical creatures, hybrid entities with a camel's head, a tiger's paws, carp-like scales, eagle's talons, the horns of a deer, etc. If you want a solid overview, I recommend this lecture by Dr. Jacqueline Cho, linked in the description. One of the conventions was this protrusion on the brow. This is called a chimu, and it was said to give the otherwise wingless dragons the capacity for flight. Not all dragons in East Asian art have chimu, but ones that do not cannot fly. When we look at the Ascendance logo, only the ascending dragon has this brow prominence. The descending dragon does not. This marks it as one who cannot, or at least cannot yet, fly. This might mark this pair as representative of a celestial and a terrestrial dragon pairing that is reminiscent of the 4 dragon kings. This is a division within Chinese and Japanese folklore that aligned 2 dragon kings with the heavenly realm, one to guard the dwellings of the gods and another to rule the wind and the rain, while 2 more were aligned with the earth, one to rule over the terrestrial and subterranean rivers and streams, and another to guard treasures beneath the earth, either natural or made by human hands. Although in some depictions the more earthly dragons are still capable of flight, the guardian of underworld treasure is said to cause volcanic eruptions as it ascends, for example. More than any specific dragon, it is likely better to view the logo as embodying the general symbolic pairing and division between the celestial and the terrestrial, the heavens and the earth. Flowing out of the dragon torch, the rising dragon both commands the weather through empowering the biome's inclemencies and surges towards the heavenly dwellings of the gods, the skybound Eyrie. Meanwhile, the descending dragon guards the subterranean treasure at the heart of Wyveria, one artificial, but the foundation of nature itself, and also commands the underworld rivers of the wormways through which wyvern milk invigorates the land, allowing crops to grow and life to flourish. A dragon, or pair of dragons flowing between the heaven and the earth, is also a recurrent motif in a lot of East Asian art, linked to the passage of seasons. The dragon ascends into the heavens at the spring equinox and descends at the autumn. Dragons in Asian religious, cultural, and artistic practices have a variety of meanings. They are used as mounts or vehicles for the Taoist immortals as a means to demonstrate their power. In China and Japan, they are often also associated with the emperor and with the imperial court, something that, given the word translated as skybound in the Japanese name of the Eyrie can refer to this court, might be relevant. However, I think in Wilds the most relevant association borne by Eastern dragons is the general association with the weather. Dragons in China and Japan are heavily associated with rain, bodies of water, and the sea. These are associations they inherited from the Naga of South and Southeast Asia, which inspired the dragon through the spread of Buddhism and specifically the image of the 4 dragon kings. They can serve as deities and spirits who bring rain to crops in agriculture, but they can also cause storms and typhoons, deluges and tornadoes. Both droughts and storms were seen as sign of the dragon's dissatisfaction, and rituals were often conducted to pacify these water deities in order to restore the land to plenty. These associations, paired with the image of the twin dragons, is something we've already seen in Monster Hunter, specifically in Monster Hunter Rise in the figures of Nawa and Ibushi, who are linked to storms, both literal, they are thunder and wind serpents, and also metaphorical through the rampage. Yet the general associations are also seen in Kushala Daora, a storm dragon we are told was once worshipped by the people of the jungle, and in Amatsu, whose serpentine horned form and control of storms etches the silhouette of an eastern dragon in contrast to the fire-breathing hexapod morphology of the western Fatalis. Although Kushala is making an appearance in Ascendance, in the story and worldbuilding of Wilds, this weather-related association is actually perhaps best represented not by any single monster at all, but rather by Wyveria itself, with its command of the cycles of drought, storm, and the harmonious healing to follow. As I've mentioned before, the name of the ruins of Wyveria in Japanese is Ryuto no Atakata, remnants of the Dragon City. Reading this name in line with wider cultural dragon associations, we might here come to understand Wyveria as a city not necessarily of dragons, but rather a city that is itself a dragon, and which, like a dragon, has the command of the cycles of plenty, inclemency, and fallow. This representation of Wyveria, however, brings me to my next point. One of the most recurrent motifs in Eastern dragon iconography is a dragon depicted alongside a flaming pearl-like jewel. This can be held in the hand, fought over in the air, or suspended beneath the dragon's chin, as in these Qing dynasty era robes, embroidery, and pottery. So yeah, let's just turn this image 90 degrees, get a different angle, and yeah, there we go. In fact, while the text obscures it here, if we flip back to the base Wilds logo and the one shown in-game, we can see that unlike the other limbs, which point backwards away from the dragon's heads, the forelimb of the descending dragon is very deliberately turned towards Wyveria and the torch, as if it's clutching this very precious flaming pearl. I told you to remember the feat. This pearl represents a large number of qualities in Asian dragon iconography, including wisdom, prosperity, thunder, celestial bodies like the sun or moon, omnipotence, and enlightenment. Within much of East Asian art, the pearl finds its origin in Indian Buddhist traditions, where it is known as the Chintamani, the wish-granting jewel. Often represented either as spherical or teardrop-like in art, it symbolizes wisdom, enlightenment, the nature of the cosmos, including the capacity for instantaneous enlightenment, and often acts as a radiant guiding light within the darkness of worldly ignorance. To obtain it is, in many narratives, seen as a path to omnipotence. In others, it works as a means to multiply and expand anything it is in contact with, particularly signs of material wealth like crops and rice. Its pairing with the dragon in Chinese art was often framed as tied to imperial power, with the power and authority of the emperor, represented in the dragon, being joined with the pearl of enlightened wisdom. The Chintamani is ubiquitous in Buddhist and Buddhist-inspired art, and some scholars have even posited stories of it brought along the Silk Road may have inspired Western understandings of the Holy Grail, which is wild. Or at least wild to anyone who hasn't consumed any Fate media. And yes, this is also in fact the Dragon Ball of Dragon Ball fame. So yeah, Wyveria may be a Dragon Ball. Rajang and Ascendance confirmed. There's another aspect of this folklore and art history lesson to touch on though, one that is more specifically Japanese. In Japanese dragon folklore, the Chintamani segues into the tidal jewels of Ryujin, the Dragon King who dwells in the Undersea Dragon Palace. Ryujin is often depicted holding an orb, one which is sometimes identified with the wish-granting jewel, but is more often framed as one of two jewels that Ryujin uniquely possesses that control the ebb and flow of the tides. These jewels, their return and deployment by various mortals and the Dragon King himself, are the topic of numerous folktales, and like the Chintamani, they are also sometimes used to represent monarchical or imperial authority. Yet the gem's more literal function adds another dimension here. Talking to the residents of Sild, we are told that the inclemency and plenty of the ruins, Wyvern's Wakening and Wyvern's Tranquility, correspond to a surge and then a thinning of the Wyvern milk, that is, to the flow and ebb of a tide. The torch here becomes not simply the Chintamani, the symbol of enlightened wisdom, material and spiritual abundance, and omnipotence, but also the tidal jewels of the Dragon King, whose power is channeled through the ebb and flow of liquid power. Reading the Dragon Torch through Chintamani iconography here deepens our understanding of Wyveria and its symbolic representation within the logo and the narrative as a whole. Looking at the diegetic version of the logo, in which the singular dragon curls out of and back around the torch, we can see the Dragon Torch as an emblem of enlightenment and transcendent wisdom, but also, through its association with the dragon, one of imperial power. A power that operates through the control of tides, of the rivers of Wyvern milk ruled over by the dragon that holds the Chintamani under its chin. It reveals Wyveria as a culture that perhaps saw itself as the bearer of a civilizing mission, its technological and spiritual superiority giving it not only the ability but maybe the authority to master nature and those who lived within it. Holding the Pearl of Wisdom, the dragon's power flows out across the land and into the heavens before ultimately returning to the singular sovereign ruler. Yet, we know the sovereignty has been severed, divided in two. The base logo and the narrative tell us this, something the people of Wyveria could not have known when they crafted this emblem. But Ascendance's logo also tells us that this remains so. Of all the updates made to the expansion's logo, the removal of the twin dragon motif was not one of them, and this seems to have some consequences. The expansion's logo tells us that the torch, the dragon lamp of weather control, enlightenment, and omnipotence, is visibly aflame. Power is growing and power is moving, and yet it symbolically has nowhere to go, and it is seemingly overflowing out of the Guardians in a similar way to the one we saw in the final phase of the Xochitl battle. If we perhaps play a bit with gameplay here, if this overflow is tied to the dragon element, we might pay a recourse to Dragon Blight, the effect that nullifies your elemental damage. We are told in Sild that elemental manipulation is among the foundational dynamics of Wyvern milk. Perhaps this overflow of dragon element might afflict the Wormways with a similar kind of blight, dampening or removing their elemental capacities, and thus preventing the inclemencies and the natural cycles to follow. So, this was originally where the video was intended to wrap up, but then I found something else, and I really needed to talk about it. Because there is in fact a third place where the logo, or its central motif at least, appears in the game, on the central path of the Grand Hub leading up to the Diva's altar. Now, critically this is only the central dragon. It lacks any of the biome symbols or the surrounding circles. It also critically lacks the core emblem of the Dragon Torch, but retains the spiral leading to it. The body is also made up of many more loops than the version of the logo in Wyveria. The more interesting element, however, at least to me, is that the radiant crystal-like image at the summit of the helix in the version found in Wyveria is here replaced with the location of the Diva's altar. One of the usages of dragon imagery is their use as vehicles for deities and immortals. Immortals, or xian, refers to a specific group of figures within Taoist religion and culture who achieved immortality through a blend of self-cultivation, alchemy, and other routes, and often gained access to supernatural or magical abilities. The full history of the Immortals is not really relevant here, but I did want to highlight a couple of factors that I think are. One is that the figures are often associated with nature and with mountains. Indeed, some scholars interpret the Chinese word to refer to a person of the mountains, an association that extends into the Japanese sennin, the mountain person. The xian or sennin were often seen as close to or embodying nature and the Tao, which granted them their longevity and their powers. Other scholars have linked the etymology to notions of ascending. This quality is displayed visually in some older Chinese art, where immortals are depicted with avian or reptilian physical qualities, such as bird-like wings or the tails of serpents or of dragons, situating them as liminal figures outside of the realm of normal humanity, and able to cross between the mortal world and the celestial one. I bring this up because it seems to me that the Wyverians of Suja may have been partly inspired by the concept of the Immortals. Wyverians are quite literally wyvern people with wyvern-like features who live long, extended lives, and in the world of Monster Hunter are often closely linked to nature. These associations are particularly highlighted in Suja, which stresses an existence in balance with nature. While they eat meat, the meat they consume is from Rathma harvested after they die naturally, something the All-Harken is able to hear with her powers. The normally skittish downy Krakes live freely among the people of Suja in abundance and seemingly blissful ease. Suja itself, settled by the exiles from Wyveria, is itself portrayed as a place of calm, where the Wyverians of the capital were able to put down roots, heal, and restore themselves after being first worshipped and then abandoned. Even the peaks of Accord themselves visually echo the mountains where immortals are said to dwell in Chinese art, as well as in the landscapes that are associated with them, such as in the Jiangxia National Park in Hunan Province. Since we know Suja was established following the Wyverians' departure from the capital, what we are seeing in this version of the logo in the Grand Hub is likely a mark of cultural continuity, one that is seemingly shorn of overt connections to the Dragon Torch and the Wormways. If dragons are vehicles of the Immortals, the one here likely signifies the journey of the Wyverians to the Peaks of Accord, and their restored harmony with nature. Yet it may still hold some secrets. The way that the emblem of infinity found at the summit in the version in Wyveria is here replaced by the Diva's stone altar tells us that both of these locations are ones of honor, reverence, and power. The Grand Hub is specifically the place of prayer, an ancestral site of worship. The Diva, with her songs that radiate out onto the crowd and fill us with strength, is here cast as analogous to whatever lies at the summit of the land spine, perhaps in the Eyrie, radiating its endless bounty upon the land. I know when the Grand Hub was released, there were more than a few slightly tinfoil hat theories that the Diva was a harbinger for Old Fatalis. Honestly, anything is possible. But setting that aside, the symbolic positioning of the Diva in the place of this source of unlimited power creates a sense of symmetry between her and that source, whatever it may be. Whether the connections are more than metaphorical is likely something we'll have to wait for Ascendance to uncover. Song is, after all, a renewable resource. This symbolic linkage does make me really curious if the Diva and other elements of the Grand Hub are going to come to the fore in Ascendance, however. The legend, after all, is the legendary artisan who gave the hunter the quest to slay Lao Shanlong in, I believe, 2nd Gen. I expect that to be called back to in Ascendance, even if it's only in the form of a side quest that gives us our upgraded armor and power charms. Items which I am told also use Lao Shanlong components in older games. It's possible that the Grand Hub will at the very least pave our path to the Eyrie, if nothing more. So this was a fun video to write. It initially grew out of my map speculation video, particularly the bits on the Veil equivalent and Hollow Earth, which led me into a deep dive on Asian dragon symbolism that was far too extensive to go into in a simple map speculation video. I did try and source all the claims I make here in actual academic research by relevant experts, but I may have also got some things wrong, so feel free to correct me in the comments. It's a really dense topic, so I hope I did it justice, and I hope I didn't butcher the Chinese too much. My command of Japanese is rusty, but my command of Chinese is non-existent, so I had to rely a lot on pronunciation guides. I am convinced, however, that the logo is drawing on Eastern Dragon symbolism. The entwined dragons tipped me off, but the callbacks to the Immortals in the culture of Suja, and the way that that one singular dragon claw is turned to cradle Wyveria, cemented it for me in my mind. What all of this ultimately means, or might mean for the expansion though, is unknown, but I hope you all found it interesting nonetheless. This is a journey I'm on with all of you too, after all. Maybe they will turn out to be snake wyverns. Like I said, Eastern dragons are historically linked to the Naga of Hindu and Buddhist cosmologies, from whom Najarala ultimately derives its English name, although here via the genus name for cobras. Regardless, I hope you all have a good week. Love and solidarity to you all. This has been Heike Leray, signing off.
Did I go and burst the bubble? Promise more than I can give. I tried to touch its cosmic sheen, but today all I smell is chlorine. Yesterday I was deep sea diving, but today I found a floor. Run my fingers over its surface, but I couldn't find a door.